the Broncos. All sorts of records broken there. Last week, I didn't introduce us. Bit arrogant, really. My name is Steve Mascord, and I'm here with Jimmy Smith. How are you, Jimmy? Now, I mean, that was just... it was weird because it was like, on one hand, at 29-0 at half-time, you kind of thought you could put some tea on and not even watch the second half. But then on the other hand, it was kind of, you couldn't look away, really. It was you just wanted to know, how far that scoreboard was going to tick over.
Just incredible. How are you, Steve? Hope you're well, and I hope all the listeners and the viewers are well too. Yeah, embarrassing. Truly embarrassing. I know they've had a lot of young players in this side, the Brisbane Broncos, and there's lots of senior players who are out at the moment, and the inexperience of the team was documented well throughout the course of that match. But, wow, I can't help but think, based on, what do we have, 5 games ago, they were beaten 58-0 by the Parramatta Eels. That was in a semi-final, and there was all sorts of question marks. And obviously it was a much stronger side than this one. All sorts of question marks about players' preparations, and then there was it came out that they were at the pokies at different stages, and which wouldn't have been a problem except they lost 58-0.
Yeah.
Question marks on Anthony Seibold from a coaching perspective. All the drama around Darius Boyd, what they're going to do with him. Anthony Milford's a $1 million player allegedly, and I'm loath to criticise players because of what they get paid. But when you start thinking about you're taking up nearly a tenth of the salary cap, we believe, and he played like he did tonight, like he literally did not want to take the line on at any point. So Roosters exceptional. Roosters absolutely exceptional. They seem to have adjusted very quickly to these new rules, Steve. I don't know whether you felt that they were that way inclined, but Jake Friend running out of dummy half more than ever. Keary, when he gets the ball, changes the speed of the game. Flanagan had his best game for the Roosters. And then some of the forwards, Warrior Hargreaves early. Victor Radley was sensational. There was literally not a bad player on the field for the Roosters.
Yeah, I think the burning question, I think a lot of people raised it on social media, even from halfway through the first half, Jimmy, is, we've only had one close game since the rule changes came in with the 6 again. The burning question is, to what extent are the rule changes responsible for that? And is it good? I mean, clearly the rules off the field, we are intended to keep the competition and the games even, i.e. the salary cap.
Yep.
And I guess philosophically, we have to sort of, examine beyond the nuts and bolts whether the rules on the field also should be designed to keep the games even. Rugby league is much harder to artificially impose parity than some other sports. For instance, in soccer, there's 2 or 3 scoring opportunities or 2 or 3 scores a game. So teams which on paper are very different in ability can still be very close near full time. In rugby league, they're running at each other. And they're not just using the ball, they're using their bodies. And it's much harder for an underdog to hang in there for 80 minutes and get a result. So the rules are already make it difficult for, to maintain that sort of parity through the whole period of the match. And have we introduced rules that have made it even harder now?
Yeah, and I'm a great believer in the fact that supremacy should be rewarded, right? If you're that much better, then it's not up to the referee to drag you back into the game, or drag the opposition back into the game. So, that's what home crowds do, right? So it's really interesting that the Broncos in front of no one suffer their biggest loss in their history at anywhere, and their biggest loss at Suncorp Stadium. The first time ever they haven't been able to score a point at Suncorp Stadium. So all that happened in front of an empty Suncorp Stadium, where the referee usually is getting under pressure from the home fans for, they've been doing it all day, sir. So that's interesting in itself. I don't know, Steve. You can't have it each way, can you? Reward the team for their dominance, but you want close games as well. You can't have it both ways. The perfect mix is that game. I don't know whether you saw it, Panthers and Newcastle, where down 14-0, Newcastle had no right to stay in that game, and yet that was as compelling a game of footy as you will see in a long time.
Yeah, but it's the only close one we've had so far. And I actually do think, it is a responsibility of the legislators to not allow the coaches to make the game boring. And so we've had this change, which has introduced, I think, a lot more entertainment. But it's equally, the people legislating for the rules are representing the fans and the broadcasters, media partners, sponsors. So they are trying to create a product that's attractive. And, I think by the end of this weekend, we'll be able to see, I think if we look at the sample sizes, you'll be able to do some statistical analysis on the margins. And I don't think big margins are good. And I think if we saw, again, I'll do the plug again, writing a book about 1997, the start of the 1997 season, the play the balls were far too quick in Super League. They thought that they were reacting against something that was bad in the game, which at the time was like the one out running and all this sort of stuff. And what they got was players diving at the feet of defenders and playing the ball really quickly, had big scores. And it was only when they saw the rules in action that they could see the flaws in them, and that the ruck started to slow down again by the end of the year under Graham Annesley and Bill Harrigan, all those sort of guys making decisions. And I think we're at a similar point with this rule, where we've seen the good sides of it last weekend, but we saw hints that it encouraged big scorelines. Tonight, we saw a hint of that again. I think by the end of the weekend, if we don't have another close game, it'll be more than a hint.
It wasn't unattractive footy tonight. So that's one thing. Like, there was ball movement, and some of the tries the Roosters scored were really, really full of skill. But I take your point, because how many Broncos fans are watching the last 20 minutes? And that's that's what you talk about with the broadcasters.
Yeah, exactly. And they've already said, Peter V'landys has already said that he took the broadcasters' views on board in introducing these rules, that the game had become a little bit boring. I mean, I think a lot boring at times. I mean, there was so much, one out running, and there was, you needed to be an exceptional player to shine in the NRL, to impose yourself on a game in the NRL, because it was so controlled. And that's awesome that we've now, taken those shackles off. So it's an important step forward, and it certainly is a good idea. But that doesn't mean it's finished. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, or and I think if we do start to see constant floggings, then I think the people who did a good job, on the chalkboard in the rules room before we returned, they might have to go back to that room and get out the chalk again and just try to improve it still more.
There was a lot of one-out running tonight. It was just from the Broncos. That's all. They didn't have anyone running with them, so that created its own problem. Hey, before we look back at last week, give us an update of what's happening in the UK scene. Are we any closer to having Super League back on the field? The last we spoke, which was last week, was August. No change to that?
No, even though, there's indications, which I think we foreshadowed last week, Jimmy, about the furloughing rules here and how much of your pay packet is paid by the government. That hasn't really led to any definitive announcements regarding Super League or the lower divisions. I know the Premier League is now, they know when they're back. Super League, I think, we'll have a look and see how that goes with the Premier League. I think they want to play as much of the season as possible in front of fans, if that is at all possible. The one thing that has happened this week is the final confirmation that the Ashes tour is off, and then we've had some debate about whether England should play against someone else, be it a home nation or indeed against an Exiles team with some very good players. I mean, imagine if Greg Inglis came over early and played for the Exiles. Then we get this extra issue, which no one's written about yet, Jimmy, is, at the end of the NRL season, when the New South Wales and Queensland players are playing Origin, all the other players should be released to represent other countries. So if England were to have a test series against, someone else, then the players really should be available to play in it, unless they're tied up in Origin. But we all know what the NRL clubs are like, and I think we could have a little bit of a fight over that if some other matches are organised.
Yeah, be disappointing, wouldn't it? I did see that Super Rugby, there's a chance that there'll be fans in the stand in 2 weeks' time when Super Rugby goes back in New Zealand. So that goes to your point about getting some fans back there. And, you know, every competition, it seems, at the elite level and even as we trickle further down from that, have different models based on different revenue streams, you know, and some are more reliant on people turning up at games. You know, the NRL and someone like the AFL are more fortunate that, you know, basically 66% of their total revenue comes from broadcasters, which is a strength and a weakness, right? You become very reliant on them. But in a time like this, you can get the TV product away, then you get, well, they're certainly not getting what they were. They renegotiated very stridently, did Channel 9, but they got their product, which has been really good. Hey, mate,
at the risk of getting political, Jimmy, I saw an interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought this is a perfect segue to what I wanted to raise. Someone on social media said during the match tonight, apparently 10,000 people can go to a Black Lives Matter protest this weekend in Sydney, but you can't go to an NRL game. And no matter your view on that, and I certainly personally am very supportive of that cause and very, very supportive of you know, the anti-racism and us as a sort of species making progress in that area. And as we said before, when on air, I'm horrified about what's happening in the US at the moment. But it's a great point. Just purely logistically, if you did take politics out of it, whatever your view is of the issues involved, it's a really good issue that the government, you know, apparently have said that it's not an illegal gathering to have 10,000 people at a march, but you can't go to the football. Tell me what you think here, Jimmy. I think the only reasons are simply it's optics. You can't deem this an illegal gathering because it's going to create too much drama for the authorities. Whereas it's much easier to say you can't go to the football. I think that, you know, that's the reason. It may not be fair, but as far as I could see, that's the only reason you can justify it.
One might be described as premeditated, as in going to the footy is, yes, you can go to the footy, whereas the other might be a bit more organic. But it's, I literally was just about to ask you, what was your take on, because I've seen some of your social media stuff throughout the course of the week. It's just, it pains me that someone can be as devoid of human emotion to have done that to George Floyd. I'm trying to remember who it was, a leader, an African-American leader who said, "We witnessed a lynching. This is what a lynching looks like."
Yeah.
And it was recorded on social media, and it was so disturbing to see the lack, how he just showed no emotion. Chauvin, the police officer, I can't believe that someone could have so much hate in their life that they would allow that. And I'm not surprised. You know, I think because of what's happened with COVID and everyone's been on edge, certainly in the US, and I know that firsthand because of family members over there. But you know, I stand with those people who are protesting about what has occurred, because we know it's not an isolated incident. And
and again,
it's very sad.
Again, I mean, the thing is, I guess this is like a rugby league show, and it's such a drop in the ocean what we think of such a massive issue like that. But I did get involved in a conversation on Facebook this week with a couple of US internationals, rugby league players. Nick Newland, the prop forward, was commenting about, you know, how terrible it was, and how, but also how, you know, that there were opportunists going to these protests and trying to create drama. And then Curtis Kunz, who's also a forward who played for the USA, who is African American, you know, got involved, and he was totally focused on the, you know, George Floyd and the horrible, you know, racism that appears endemic in parts of American life, and to sort of get involved in that conversation and sort of walk the middle of it. And you know, Nick was saying that even in terrible times of trouble like this, which should transcend, you know, left and right, that people still want to say, well, you're left or you're right if you hold a certain opinion, and that was a terrible aspect of modern life that everything gets reduced to that. And so just again, so you know, I don't, I guess from the point of view of being a rugby league pundit and talking about these giant issues, and it's seeming, I mean, we feel like we have to talk about it, but it does affect people in our little community as well, because our little community, you know, is the United States is part of our little community. So yeah, and Atlanta is a sort of a newish, you know, hotbed of our sport. Certainly New York has been, Philadelphia, and so we know people who are affected by this, and who are scared to go outside, and whose businesses are affected, and it's a terrible time for everybody. So, you know, I guess on one hand, someone might say you're trivialising it by talking about it on a footy show, and someone else might say you're trivialising it even more by trying to reduce it to rugby league. But you know, I'm just trying to give make it a little bit relevant to the sport we're talking about here tonight.
I read a statistic that said that you know, before George Floyd, black workers were being furloughed and put off by employers at a rate of 2 to 1 compared to white workers. So you know, it's I'm not saying we're devoid of that in Australia, but it's definitely not as prominent as it seems to be in the US. What did you make of last week's round beyond the game we spoke about last Thursday, which was the Eels-Broncos game? But we've spoken very briefly. I think there's about 3.5 minutes extra ball in play each game. There's a huge amount of run meters extra per game, more tackles, etc. Certainly more points, less penalties. Was there a standout side in your mind? Was there a standout player from what you saw?
I was excited by the Raiders, but I think everyone over here in the UK who follows rugby league were excited by the Raiders, particularly by the performance of George Williams.
He was trending.
Yes, he was. He's trending in the UK. You know, Sean Wayne must be, you know, looking at him to be, if he has a game at the end of the year, if Sean Wayne can organise a test or two, must be looking at him to be halfback for England with maybe Gareth Widdop, his partner. But the interesting one, and to rewind a little bit, Victor Radley is eligible for England, and the question is, but Sean Wayne is quite a patriot. He doesn't seem a huge fan of Australians representing England or Kiwis or whatever, Samoans. So whether he would actually pick up the phone to Victor Radley is a big question.